I'm the Director of Wright for Rent, and we are specialists in property tax, dealing with just landlords and property investors on a day-to-day basis. As landlords ourselves, we also have that added understanding to provide our clients with a complete service. As you may be aware, we work in partnership with the Residential Landlords Association and the Property Tribes, and we are regularly making comments and providing features for various newspapers and other online media outlets. And really, together with James, we hope that we bring some clarity to the recent budget announcements regarding mainly the mortgage interest changes, but then also going on to discuss other matters such as the wear and tear allowance and so forth. So perhaps if I pass back over to James to start summarising the agenda.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. I apologise if there was an issue with the sound right at the beginning. I think there was an issue with one of our options, but I think that has all been sorted out now. In the next 45 minutes, what we want to be covering off is this agenda, which are changes to the wear and tear allowance that came through in the budget. The one key thing we're going to be focused on quite a bit is the changes to mortgage interest relief and how they will affect us. We'll do a couple of case studies of how that can affect all of us, and what things also need to be taken into account, for example, mortgage broker fees. We'll look at a couple of case studies and other ways around all of this in terms of looking at limited companies, etc., whether that's something that is worthwhile looking into. So what do these new laws mean for landlords? Well, the first thing that we want to cover off is the 10% wear and tear rule that has going to change from the beginning of next year onwards. So from next tax year, April 16 onwards, we will only be able to deduct the actual cost of replacing furnishings and not how things have been currently, where if you received £10,000 in annual rent, you could deduct 10% against your tax liability under the wear and tear allowance, and that's going to be ended quite soon. There was a consultation period which has now expired, and it will be included in next year's finance bill, where it is just the replacement of furnishings that will be allowed to take into account rather than the 10% aspect of things. Michael, is there anything you want to add into that?
Well, I think really just to go into that in some greater detail, in that currently, if you are a landlord with a fully furnished property, at present you're allowed to claim 10% of the net rental income that's being received, and the benefit for a lot of landlords who did operate fully furnished lets was that you could always claim that 10% in years even where furniture costs hadn't been incurred. So that is, of course, going to be stopped from April 2016 onwards. It's important to note that the costs that you are going to be able to claim from next year onwards are just the replacement costs and not the initial cost. So for instance, if for the first time for a tenant you purchase for them a tumble dryer, for instance, that initial cost, as it's the first time you purchased it for the tenant, would not be an allowable deduction. But when you came to replace it, say in a couple of years' time, that replacement cost would be allowed. So there's quite an important point to be made there. There is, the new system is quite similar to what was actually abolished back in April 2013, which was the old renewals allowance. So it's in some ways it's quite similar to how that used to work, except that now this new replacements basis is available to landlords of fully furnished property, partly furnished and unfurnished property. So really the winners here are arguably the landlords with unfurnished property, Whereas if you were a landlord who had a furnished property and you weren't incurring very much furniture costs, then you're not going to be in a very favourable position because you would lose that claim each year.
No, exactly. I think that's bang on. I think it'd be good to do a quick poll, if I may, just to understand the people that we've got in the room of whether you currently claim the 10% wear and tear allowance either for all of your properties or just for some of them. So if you could select the option that is most applicable from your perspective, that would be much appreciated. And once you've selected the right option, then press the submit button, and then we'll go back to the slide deck. But it's just really useful for us just to get a feel for who's in the room at the moment and how you are currently claiming for the wear and tear allowance or not. So it'd be really helpful if you can just press one of those buttons. Let's bring the results up on the screen. Let me see if we can get that to work. So a bit of a mixed bag of those that do and those that don't currently claim the wear and tear allowance. It's really interesting. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for participating in that. It's much appreciated indeed. Going back to the to our slides. The other thing to also be in mind that came into force within the budget was that from next year the rent room relief will be increasing quite dramatically, actually, to £7,500, and this is where you rent out a spare room in your residential property. You need to make sure you are claiming this on your self-assessment tax return under the land and property section, but that amount has increased quite dramatically from where it used to be before, and certainly in my mind brought up to where it should be, as it hasn't been updated for quite some time. So I think that's a good thing. That said, moving on to the deduction of interest on mortgages, this is probably the biggest change that came through on the budget. And in terms of what this means is that at the moment we are allowed to take into account all the interest on our mortgages against our rental income. So if you have a rental income of, say, £10,000 per annum and your interest per annum on your mortgage is £6,000, you can include all of that before how much tax is due to pay on your property. What George Osborne's put forward is that it requires all of us as landlords to pay tax now on part of our costs, which is a dramatic shift because clearly if you're running a business, for example, you're only paying tax on your net profit as opposed to on your income, which is very much what this will be. And by the time 2021 comes around, which is when this will be fully put into play, the deduction for finance interest will be capped at 20%, and this new rule starts in 2017. Michael, just from a top-line perspective, is there anything that you want to add to that?
I think, I mean, it's probably helpful to confirm, I think, which properties exactly are going to be affected by this, which is that it's going to be residential properties. So that would mean that it's not going to include, say, a furnished holiday let, it's not going to include commercial properties, and it's not going to include properties which are held within a corporate structure. So I think that's one important point to note. Now, I think there does seem to be difficulty in putting the point across as to how exactly the changes are going to affect landlords. And the best way we've found to describe it is that really it's how your taxable profit is arrived at is what's changing, because before your profit was determined by saying your rental income less all your expenses, including your mortgage interest, is your taxable profit. But now, from April 2017 onwards, it's going to be your rental income less allowable expenses, but excluding your mortgage interest, which will be your taxable profit. That will be the amount which is taxed, and then once you've got your end tax calculation, that is when you would then deduct your mortgage interest times 20% to reduce the tax that's owed. So it's going going to affect landlords who have got mortgages who are higher rate and additional rate taxpayers, but it's also going to affect, because of this new way of expressing the taxable profit, it has the potential to affect basic rate taxpayers who, under the new system, will become higher rate taxpayers.
And I think just to add to that, we've got a couple of illustrations coming up shortly,
Yes.
so you can see for yourself what that actually means. So we will talk about how that actually means for your specific circumstances in terms of how much your mortgage is and what rates you're on. What was interesting from my perspective is there was no formal consultation on this. It was a new rule legislation that was passed. There wasn't a consultation period like there was for the wear and tear allowance. And as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be part of the finance bill for next year. It does need to go through some parliamentary security. And if you want to understand more about it, there is a guide that HMRC has put together to understand the impact that you can download using that URL that is in front of you. If you miss any of these slides, you will get a copy of the recording of this webinar afterwards, so you can come back to this later on, tomorrow onwards, etc. If you so wish. So how will you as a landlord be affected by these new rules? Well, we've just put a sort of a simple case study together, for example, for basic taxpayers, and we'll just run through a sort of just a very top-line scenario. Michael, do you want to run through this?
Okay, so the example that we've got here is of a landlord that's got no other income apart from their rental business. And what we've said in this example is that they've got rental income before expenses of £65,000. They have mortgage interest of £40,000, and they have other costs, insurance, repairs and so forth, of £5,000. Now, under the current tax return period, and until these changes come in 2017, this would mean that your taxable profit would be £20,000. Now, when the 4-year phase-in has completed and the rules will fully be in place for the mortgage interest, you will see in the second part of this illustration that your profit will now be £60,000 because we can't include the mortgage interest in that profit calculation. So you'll see in that instance that this really illustrates someone who was previously in the basic rate band, and because of these changes, they are now in the higher rate 40% tax band.
Exactly. So we've got another scenario here of looking at somebody that has a rental income of £200,000 per annum, allowable expenses in terms of costs of letting a property, accountancy fees, etc., and mortgage interest of £20,000. So what we've put together here is what changes will occur for the tax charge. Michael, I'm assuming this is when it's fully implemented rather than just in the first year when it's not completely implemented, for example.
Yes, I mean, it's, as we said, there is going to be a 4-year phase-in from April 2017 onwards. We can come on to that a bit later. But for the ease of illustration, it's best to show a comparison between how it is now and how it will be in that after the 4-year phase-in has completed. And what we did with this illustration is we used the tax thresholds for the 2014-15 tax year as really these are the tax returns that we're preparing at present. So what we're showing really with this example is that previously under the old system the tax charge is 19,000 because we had a much lower profit because we could include the mortgage interest as part of the taxable profit. And then what's happened is when we look at the after scenario, which would be in 2021, is that we can no longer include the mortgage interest in there. We then calculate the tax on the new rental profit, and then at the bottom we would deduct 20 of the 20,000 mortgage interest. So what that's resulted in this example is an extra £4,000 of tax being owed by this taxpayer of this illustration.
Which is quite shocking for this example, that there's basically a 20% increase in how much tax they're going to have to pay pre-post these changes, which is a big lump of change for people to find over the next 6 years. And we're coming on to things in a minute. We've got another example where somebody's got an annual rental income of just under 45k, 7k of allowable expenses, and interest on their mortgages of nearly 25k. They earn 100 grand through their normal employment, and in this scenario, Michael, do you want to run through the rest of the numbers?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is just really taking things a bit more of a one step further, really, so that we're including salary as part of this, as you know, we appreciate that landlords are quite often not dealing just with letting property; they do often have a salary as well. And in this instance, with a landlord who also has 100,000 salary, applying these figures prior to the changes, these figures show that his tax is coming on to £8,000, whereas with the new changes coming into force, it's not far off being double the amount of tax that's owed, which shows that for some landlords it can be quite a catastrophic change for them.
I think for this particular scenario, looking on these numbers, and you know, we don't need to go through what all of them are, but what is quite startling from my perspective is that this guy's tax bill in effect doubles purely because of this particular change, which is quite a dramatic shift, and it's not just sort of a token gesture in increased tax on what this landlord has to pay. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think the other thing, just to mention very briefly, is that what we have been seeing ourselves with our clients is there is the potential now for you to make a loss, or what used to be classed as a loss, when you deduct your mortgage interest, and still have to pay tax, which is something which is causing quite a lot of alarm with a lot of our clients.
Yeah, no, quite. So what we've put together that hopefully is quite useful for everybody is a calculator. You can either make a note of the URL at the top of the page to go to this calculator that we put together. I think if you also go to, in the chat section, we're just putting the link in there so you can easily just click on it and you'll be able to access it through your browser. But what you will be able to do is do a real case scenario for your specific circumstances. So you use the slidey bar to determine what your mortgage amount is, what rate you're paying for that amount of mortgage, and what tax band you are in, and it will show you what your tax liability will be for each of those 4 years as this new rule comes into play. And I really urge you to do this so that you get a steer to see how affected you will be, if at all, and then look at ways to ensure that you know, you're not going to put yourself in a difficult position as and when this comes into play, and be a bit proactive to think things through before they actually occur. There are a couple of things to note about this particular change in terms of how to sort of get around things or restructure your business accordingly. And there's 5 key things that might be worth looking at. Michael's already mentioned about the furnished holiday lets that is excluded from this. Do you want to just briefly run through those other points, Michael?
Yes, I mean the first one is somewhat a little more obvious. If you do have the opportunity to pay down any mortgages, as essentially this is really a change that is going to affect landlords with mortgages. The next option could be if incorporating is a solution. There is a lot of pros and cons, though, really, as to whether setting up a company is suitable for your circumstances, and there isn't really a one-size-fits-all solution. It's really seeing if it's suitable for you, not just for now, but also for the future as well. We've mentioned Form 17 arrangements, whereby there could be the potential where there's a husband and wife, for instance, that own a property, and one of them is, say, a higher rate taxpayer, and one perhaps maybe a stay-at-home mother or father. And what a Form 17 arrangement can do in combination with changing the beneficial ownership of the property is to allocate, say, 99% of the property profits to the lower earner and, say, 1% of the profits to the higher earner. And that can be a way that works for some landlords as a way to mitigate this. We mentioned as well on this slide about extending the 40% tax band. What we mean by that is you can, for instance, make a pension contribution or into an ABC or a gift aid donation, which are mechanisms which delay the point at which you start paying tax at 40%. And then the final point we've mentioned there is that perhaps if you are looking at making further purchases, a furnished holiday let may be a good opportunity, as they are not affected by these mortgage interest changes. The main reason there being that holiday lets are classed as a trade as opposed to buy-to-lets, which are classed as an investment. There is quite a lot of criteria, quite strict criteria to meet the conditions of being a furnished holiday let. But yes, that's a lot of detail probably that's more than required for today.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I think, the other thing just to add to this is it's very hard within sort of 40 minutes to run through every specific situation here, and we're trying just to give an overview and I suppose at least allow everybody to make an informed decision about what they should be doing over the next few years based on their circumstances, based on what their additional liability will be, and at least prepare for it rather than sort of putting your head in the sand to a certain degree. So this is very much meant to be sort of a snapshot of what the effects will be. What I'd like to run through now is just a couple of slides that we've got from some research that we've done ourselves, and it just hopefully be quite interesting to see whether this is aligned from your perspective of what you're looking to do. And we did a survey to the database at Upad, so all landlords that have used us, about whether they won't be doing any changes at all to how they manage their portfolio in terms of paying down mortgages or selling properties. But I just thought it was really interesting to look at the three main areas where a good third of all landlords will not be making any changes. A third will be looking just to maintain what they've got and not looking to acquire any more. And there's a third that are looking to increase their portfolio, which I think is quite interesting. What I would wonder is just how much due diligence everybody's done to understand what the effects would be. But what I do think is really interesting is how people will manage their increased tax liability that will ultimately be occurring for pretty much all of us out there. And what I think is quite interesting, and I suppose worrying, is the fact that most landlords appear to be looking to increasing the rent that they charge when these tax liabilities come into play, rather than just absorbing it or selling or what have you. So there seems to be a few people that are mitigating the cost by looking at putting some properties into their partner's name, for example, but the overwhelming majority are looking to increase their rents. And I find this sort of worrying for a couple of reasons, because in terms of why George Osborne put to implement this into play was very much about preventing the housing market from destabilizing. He wanted to put fairness in play so that homeowners and landlords are on the same path in terms of how things were managed. But I just wonder whether this will actually have the opposite effect of stabilizing the rental sector and doing the absolute opposite and destabilizing it. And what I mean by this is the following. We see there being tighter buy-to-let lending going on at the moment in terms of what the loan-to-value and the credentials are to take out a buy-to-let loan. Certainly there's the new European rules that will come into play at the beginning of next year, where if you are a accidental landlord, there will be checks done in a similar way to when you're applying for a traditional home mortgage. These won't apply if you are running your property as a business and you can prove you've been a landlord for many years. Certainly there's going to be increased interest rates going forward. I think it's a question of when rather than if rates will start going up. It's obviously unlikely from what everybody's been saying this will happen in the next 12, possibly 18 months, but rates will start going up. And as we've been talking about, there's going to be higher tax bills for us as landlords. And so in my mind, I think there will be a case where some landlords will look to sell up their properties because the sums just simply don't stack up like they once did. And whilst this will create more properties on the market to buy, it will reduce the amount of rental properties that are available. And we already know that there are far more tenants chasing each property than there ever used to be before, and I think this will accelerate that further. Also, from a tenant's perspective, is you'd have thought if there are more properties on the market to buy, it will have effect of not driving house prices up as much as they have been. But my view is that there will be further controls over first-time buyers in terms of getting higher deposits. We certainly haven't seen any significant house building that's been talked about the last 20, 30 years or so. And I also think that those properties that will be coming on the market are going to be those with low yields, primarily London and the southeast, which is not your traditional property a first-time buyer will be buying. So those properties that are coming available that landlords are selling, I don't see being taken up by first-time buyers, as they are a very different class of properties. Which means, in my mind, and do post any comments in the chat box on whether you think this makes sense or whether you disagree, but if there's less rental stock on the market, just simple supply and demand says that it will drive rents up further. And also, if there are more first-time buyers that are unable to get on the housing ladder because these additional properties that are becoming available are not the type of properties in terms of a price range and location that first-time buyers are after, it will drive up rents as there's more demand from tenants and a reduced supply from landlords of rental stocks. Furthermore, for those landlords that don't sell their rental properties with the higher tax bills and so on, is I think we will see rents going up to cover the cost of them. It's sort of my gut belief from looking at the data, but also from the surveys that we've done and I just showed, that I think a lot of landlords are going to pass on these additional costs onto higher rents. And I suppose the worrying thing for us as landlords is will this mean rent arrears go up even further? We've already seen the amount of arrear cases going to court nearly triple what they were 2 years ago, and I think that will exaggerate further. And I think the amount of checks that landlords will be doing on tenants in terms of referencing them and having guarantors, even if they're not students, will drive forward more, because the risk factor that they are choosing a tenant that may go into arrears because the proportion of the rent that they are paying from their salary is increasing. The average tenant pays about 25–30% of their take-home pay on rent. The second it starts creeping up to sort of 40% or even more of their take-home pay, the risk factor that they go into arrears will exaggerate. But do please put your comments into the chat box. I'd really welcome any comments you have as to whether you think this flowchart that we put together makes sense, or whether you strongly disagree with it. The other thing that we looked at was looking at some of the government data, where it was published that that about 1 in 5 landlords would be affected by this. And when you look at the fact that there are around 2 million landlords in the UK, and each of them own approximately 3 properties on average, and there are on average 1.8 tenants per property in the UK, what that grosses up to mean is that the real people that will be affected by this are going to be tenants. And of the approximately 8–9 million tenants in the UK, nearly 3 million of them will be affected, based on the government data, that it will be 1 in 5 landlords. So there's something like a third of all tenants, 1 in 3 tenants, is going to be affected by landlords either increasing the rent to cover their additional costs, or they will be selling their properties because they don't make commercial sense, which will further drive up rents because of a lack of supply, which I find really, really worrying. And I think going back to what I mentioned earlier about whether this will destabilize the housing market or not, is something that is interesting and something to be discussed. Certainly, there's obviously a lot of noise from research we've done and online that a lot of landlords are passing on their additional costs. And as a case study, quite recently it was passed in Scotland that estate agents were not allowed to charge fees to tenants when they were looking to rent a property. And so that was abolished just over a year ago now. And what we've seen in Edinburgh in particular is that rents have increased in the last 12 months by about 9%. And yet the UK average is about 3.5%. And so you've seen a massive increase in rents in Edinburgh compared to the rest of the UK on the basis that those agency fees have been passed on to the landlord, who have then passed it on to the rent. And so I think this is a very politically motivated change in tax, but I do wonder whether it's going to affect the wrong people at large. So do please post any comments you've got on this and whether you think this makes sense or not. Michael, I realise I've been talking a fair bit there, but do you agree with this? Do you disagree? Do you think let's wait and see?
Yes, I think it's going to be very much a case of wait and see, to be honest. I mean, it's still all very new, and I think that's been, I mean, where we've been discussing matters with the Residential Landlords Association as well, who've been dealing with the Treasury and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of talk from the Revenue and Customs saying that that it's the 1 in 5 landlords that are affected, but how many properties do these 1 in 5 landlords have? And it's quite a crucial point, and yeah, I mean, it'd be very interesting to see really how it pans out really over the next couple of years.
Indeed, indeed. So please do use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen to post any comments you've got. We'll try and run through as many as we can in a second. Indeed, if you've got any other questions that we either haven't covered off or you want further explanation, do please use that to put any questions, and we will be going through them shortly. Just before we do, and just to finish off the slide deck, I think it's important we just keep calm and carry on. There's a question about whether all of these policies will actually be introduced in terms of the mortgage interest relief in particular. I do wonder whether reality may mean that it gets watered down or changed. Do use the next couple of years to think about what the effects will be on your business, and make sure you're fully aware of what's going on. Talk to an expert. Michael knows far more about this than I do, and sort of lives, breathes and dies property tax. So use him for what it's worth. His contact details will be coming up shortly. But I do think, and this is a very important point in my mind, that a line has been crossed as far as the government is concerned, and that for the first time in a long time, landlords are being targeted from a taxation perspective. I think this is very politically motivated. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But is he looking to increase what is put forward in future years? And so I think it's something we should all be aware of going forward. To that end, I'd like to do another quick poll, if I may, on whether you think you will continue being a landlord, whether you're looking to sell up now, or maybe you're not a landlord and this isn't relevant. But if you could please select one of those options, that would be much appreciated. That most applies to you from what Michael and I have been running through over the last 30 minutes or so. Once you've done so, please press the submit button, and then we will bring up the results. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to do that now. So everybody is very much swayed to the idea that they'll still be doing the business of being a landlord for some time, which is encouraging to see, and we're not put off by it. I think the interesting bit is how the dynamics will change in terms of, will rents be increased to cover these increased costs, or will landlords at large just bear the cost of these? So I think that will be an interesting one from my perspective. So thank you very much indeed for posting all of those comments. Let me just go to the right slide. Sorry, I don't know why it went back to the beginning. I do apologise there. So just to sort of finish up, in terms of, you know, state of play, I don't think we should over-concern ourselves with what's happening for the next few years whilst we have a Tory Parliament. As landlords, we should be looking at trends for the next 10, 20 years rather than just what's happening in the short term. And I think that's important that we are aware of that rather than acting just on the short-term basis. But just to summarise, what we've been talking about is that tenant demand is continuing to increase. The lack of properties that are available with the growing tenant base has meant that rents will continue to be driven upwards. Tenants very much are looking online for the next rental, in particular mobile devices that we've seen here. Nearly 54% of all tenants looking on mobile devices for the next rental. So having your property online is absolutely important. It's important just to be aware from a presentation perspective that when you're advertising your property, using really good photos and a floor plan maximises tenant interest. Obviously, by doing so means you're maximising the rent that you can charge, which is a really important thing to consider. But be aware, as we've sort of run through the key aspects of this evening, on how the budget will affect you, and is it something that you are happy to carry the cost of, or do you need to look at reevaluating your business and how it's currently managed. But either way, I think a line has been crossed, and that landlords have been targeted for for the first time. So there may be more releases that come out in the next few years that will be affecting us. But just be aware of the long-term trends rather than just what's happening for the next couple of years or so. I think is sort of quite important. So hopefully that was insightful and useful. If you've missed any of the slides, you'll be able to get a copy of these afterwards, where we will send it through. We've had quite a lot of questions coming through, and I'm conscious that the football started as well, so I don't want to keep everybody too long. But just to sort of go through some of these that have come through, and just sort of picking out a couple, and I think Michael will do some as well. People asking about whether the rules relating to mortgage interest relief have been fully published or not. Yes, they have been fully published. They've decided that there will be no consultation period on this, and this is sort of full and final. One thing I do believe is that the effects of these tax changes haven't necessarily been thought through properly, and it wouldn't surprise me, given we've got 24 months before they get implemented, that they may be amended or tweaked. That said, we shouldn't be banking on that, and we should be aware that, you know, what is going to occur is actually what's going to occur, and we shouldn't think otherwise. A couple of other questions that have come through about why will you not be able to include 20% of the interest charges on your tax return. Michael, is that something you want to pick up on, or do you want more information from the person that submitted that one through?
Sorry, so what? So why would we
not be able to include 20% of the interest charges?
Well, I mean, this is going to be the change that's coming in, that you would claim 20% of the mortgage interest as a deduction against your tax bill, but your tax bill is now going to be calculated by times in your newly calculated rental profit by your rate of tax, and it's at that point it then gets reduced by the 20% times your mortgage interest.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much. Another question about how, if you only have property income, i.e. money on the self-assessment tax return on the land and property section, how much can you and your wife earn before these extra tax implications begin to bite? Well, I would suggest, and I'll pass over to Michael in a second, is I would use that calculator we put up earlier with the 25 or the 40% tax band, whatever is applicable, and to run the numbers to see what effect it would be versus what it is that you're paying now, and what will be the best way of structuring things going forward. Michael, is that something you would agree with, or
yeah? I mean, they mentioned about if you have no other employment income or so forth. So really the point is making sure you're aware of the personal allowance rates and also the rates of where you go into the higher rate band. So at the moment you've got a personal allowance of £10,600, which is an amount you can earn before paying tax, and the next rate is between the £0 and £31,785, and it's at that point plus your personal allowance, which is when you start going into the 40% tax band.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. A couple of interesting comments saying that 1 in 5 landlords being affected is a massive underestimation. I'm inclined to agree with you. That figure came from the government, so maybe read into that on their own analysis. There wasn't any detail published behind it all, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was an exceptionally pessimistic viewpoint. A couple of people asking about our views about these changes destabilizing the housing market rather than stabilizing it, and whether we will bring this to the attention of George Osborne. It's quite interesting. There's we actually had on a webinar fairly recently somebody from HMRC listening in that was part of the team that was implementing these changes and working on it all. I actually shared the slides with him, and we had a couple of conversations. My gut says they are aware of this. I wonder how much. I think whether anything gets looked at, changed, or tweaked is based on how much noise occurs from landlords and others within the space about what effect it will have. And whilst it's clearly politically motivated, if it's going to affect nearly a third of all tenants, there may be a view that this gets amended or tweaked. And I've certainly been working on that, and you know, it's in my interest professionally and also as being a landlord to work on that as well. Going back to a couple of other questions, some good one here. What constitutes allowable expenses, and is there sort of a black and white list of what these are? Michael, I'm assuming this landlord is referring to those allowable expenses when you're doing your land and property tax return. So outside of your accountancy fees, your letting agency fees, getting your gas certificate and the EPC done, what else falls under the allowable expenses?
Well, to be honest, there isn't a definitive list of expenses per se, but I mean there are a huge wealth of expenses that are potential claims against your rental income. You know, that could be anything from ground rent service charges, cleaning costs, insurances, through to repairs and renewals. Then you've got professional fees, such as if you've got accountancy fees, letting agent, management fees, or tenant finding. You may incur travel costs in visiting your property. If you're a member of a landlord association, if you incur telephone costs. I mean, the list could go on for quite a long time, but really they've got to wholly
They're the key
relate
ones,
to,
aren't they?
yeah, I mean, it's got to wholly relate to your property business.
Indeed. Here's an interesting one, Michael. How about interest on loans used for acquiring and refurbishing rental properties? So let's just say I've got a property that's worth 300 grand and I've got a 100k mortgage on there. If I increase my mortgage to say 200k and use that additional 100 to either be the deposit for a new property or towards the refurbishment cost of a property that I've already got, what effect happens there in that particular scenario?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's a case that you know, the changes are affecting costs, finance costs relating to rented property. I mean, this is where we were also sort of touching on recently about mortgage arrangement fees and mortgage broker fees as well. It's cutting together really the costs incurred in borrowing relating to your letting business. And you know, that's quite a key point actually to mention as well about the arrangement fees, because they can add up to several £1,000s, and so it'd be quite important to, you know, if you are getting a mortgage soon, to get that claim in, you know, sooner rather than later, because if you are incurring arrangement fees after these changes come into force, then that's quite a big claim that's been lost.
Indeed. And then another good question in terms of how do we deal with carried forward losses from previous years? My view is, well, that doesn't change. If you've got 30k from previous years that of losses that accumulated, you just carry that forward for the current financial year as you would normally. There's no change there as far as I'm concerned. Is that right, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, as far as rental property is concerned, as you're probably aware, there isn't a sideways relief. You can't claim in a loss in a period against any other income. So if you are making a loss, as usual, you would just carry that forward for use against future rental profits.
Brilliant. Okay, and I think we've got time for a couple more. A couple of people are asking about how do you apply, or what do you have to do to apply for the Form 17 that you mentioned earlier?
Well, there's a few steps to the process because really, first of all, the Form 17 has got to go into the Revenue and Customs. It's a form that's available on the Revenue and Customs website, but it has to be submitted to the Revenue and Customs with sufficient proof. Now, where the proof comes in is that you would have to actually change the beneficial ownership structure of the property, and that would be, say, by a deed of trust or so forth that perhaps a solicitor could draw up, and you would send that proof with the Form 17, and then once that's agreed, you would then, from that point on, you can then split the rental profits as per the beneficial ownership splits.
Fine, thank you. And I think just finally, the last question that we've really got sort of time for here is just to clear up on a query. Is this cap on mortgage interest only on residential mortgages as opposed to other types? I'm assuming this person is referring to buy-to-let mortgages as opposed to a residential mortgage on your home, for example.
Well, the key really is what type of property it is. I mean, it's similar that you could get out a loan to go towards a property or some other form of finance. But the key is really that what it's for, and if it's for a residential property, then those finance costs are going to be what is going to start to be restricted from 2017 onwards.
Cool. Michael, thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really helpful for me, and I've learned certainly a few things over the last 40 minutes, 50 minutes or so. If anybody wants more information, obviously the Upad site's got a wealth of information. We've got our newsletter and blog, but also you might want to contact Michael directly. His business, as you mentioned earlier, is called rita4rent.co.uk. So that's Rita, R-I-T-A, the number 4 rent. .co.uk. We'll circulate his details afterwards, so everybody's got that with a copy of the recording, so you can go through this again if you would like to. There'll also be a feedback form on there, so if there's anything you think we should be covering off in the future, other parts of taxation or other areas of being a landlord, please do put your comments in there, and also on how we can improve these webinars. I apologise for a bit of the sound problems we had right at the beginning, but I hope we got them rectified quite speedily. I would like to just finally thank Michael for joining me this evening, and it's a pleasure doing it with you, Michael. It certainly makes my life a bit easier rather than doing these just on my own. So thank you so much indeed. It's been really, really helpful, and hopefully everybody got a lot out of it. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Yes, no, it was great to have the opportunity to speak to everyone. I think as well to raise awareness of what's happening. Yeah, thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you so much. May I wish everybody a very pleasant evening. Go and enjoy the football, and hopefully